Simon Cowell called her a lion, but then he tried to put her in a cage. Everyone knows Courtney Hadwin's legendary AGT audition, but almost nobody knows the real reason Simon lost his grip on the biggest rock prodigy of our generation. He made one critical error that cost him millions, and it all started with a single phone call he never should have made. Picture this. It is the summer of 2018. A trembling 13-year-old girl walks onto the massive stage of America's Got Talent. She looks incredibly nervous, entirely out of place under the glaring studio lights, answering the judges' questions with monosyllabic whispers and a defensive posture. The audience and the judges silently prepare for a cute, maybe slightly pitchy, completely forgettable pop song. But the second the instrumental track drops, the shy exterior completely shatters. She launches into a guttural, earth-shaking, practically possessed rendition of Otis Redding's Hard to Handle. The performance is so raw, so violently energetic, and so unpolished that Judge Howie Amandel immediately smashes the golden buzzer, comparing her wild stage presence to the legendary Janis Joplin. The internet effectively broke overnight. Over 300 million views poured in across various platforms. She was a pre-packaged viral anomaly, an old, weary blues soul seemingly trapped in the body of a British teenager. Naturally, the music industry bloodhounds immediately caught the scent. And sitting right at the center of the judges' panel was the ultimate apex predator of pop music himself, Simon Cowell. Simon immediately recognized that this was not just a fleeting viral moment, it was a generational cash cow waiting to be milked. Following the finale of the show, she was swiftly ushered into the elite inner sanctum of the music industry. She signed a massive, high-stakes record deal with Syco Music in a powerful partnership with Arista Records. On paper, this was the ultimate victory condition for any aspiring musician. A working-class girl from County Durham, England, suddenly backed by the legendary label that once represented absolute titans like Aretha Franklin and Whitney Houston. The narrative sold to the public was a perfect modern fairy tale, but in reality, this was the beginning of a catastrophic bureaucratic nightmare, a systematic suppression of the very creative spark that made her a global phenomenon in the first place. To understand the sheer magnitude of Cowell's tactical error, you have to look deeply into the fundamental business DNA of Syco Music. Syco was never built for unpredictable rock and roll. It was an industrial assembly line, a meticulously calibrated pop factory designed from the ground up to churn out radio-friendly, highly controllable assets. The label's entire infrastructure relied on predictable songwriters, standardized production formulas, heavily researched focus groups, and artists who would simply smile, hit their marks, and sing exactly what they were told. You absolutely cannot put a wild, blues-roaring, erratic rock artist into a sanitized pop pipeline and expect anything other than a complete disaster. Yet, that is exactly what the executives stubbornly tried to do. Cowell's creative team immediately attempted to polish the raw grit right out of her voice. Instead of capitalizing on her aggressive, vintage rock persona, the label forced her to record a rushed extended play titled The Cover Sessions in 2019. It was a completely sanitized, overly produced collection of live covers that meticulously stripped away the visceral, dangerous edge of her live performances. This is a recurring, systemic flaw in the reality television music industrial complex. The label treats artists like algorithms rather than human beings. Consider 3 parallel historical examples where the pop machinery actively destroyed raw talent. First, look at Dalton Rapatney from American Idol, a punk rock kid who was forced into doing watered-down pop ballad covers until his core demographic completely abandoned his releases. Second, consider the frustrating trajectory of Chris Daughtry, who had to violently fight his own post-show management just to maintain a shred of actual hard rock credibility, nearly getting permanently shelved in the process. Third, look at Michael Johns, another gritty soul singer who was squeezed through the reality television pop filter until his unique artistic identity was completely diluted and lost in the noise. Courtney Hadwin was plummeting directly into this exact same corporate trap. Following her cover's release, she spent 2 entire years locked away in recording studios, working exhaustively on an original debut album that the executives continually delayed. Why? Because her raw rock sound did not fit their narrow, algorithmic definition of a safe, guaranteed pop radio hit. she was essentially shelved. This is a notorious and deeply cynical industry practice, where a major label signs a dangerous or unconventional artist not to actually develop them, but simply to keep them off the open market so a rival label cannot profit from their talent. Cowell had successfully captured the lion, but he locked her in a sterile, windowless boardroom, bleeding her momentum dry. But the strategic mismanagement of her sonic identity was only the prologue to the ultimate corporate betrayal. The real disaster, the moment that completely fractured her relationship with the industry, struck right before her 16th birthday. Courtney had spent 2 grueling years conforming to the label's endless demands. She compromised her artistic vision, she adapted to their grueling schedules, and she finally reached a stage where her debut original single was completely greenlit by the executives. The release date was firmly set on the calendar. The marketing rollout was prepared. The photo shoots were done. Then came the midnight phone call. Out of absolutely nowhere, in the middle of the night, Courtney received a devastating call informing her that her highly anticipated release had been abruptly canceled. The reason had absolutely nothing to do with her music or her talent. The truth was far more cold and calculated. Simon Cowell had quietly decided to downsize his empire and effectively shut down the core operations of Syco Music. Corporate restructuring meant that the entire label staff was suddenly jobless. Without any public warning, and without any transition plan for the artists, the record label collapsed from the inside out, leaving its entire roster in a state of sudden professional paralysis. Cowell, the very man who stood up and gave her a standing ovation on national television, the powerful mogul who promised her family he would guide her career to the top of the charts, essentially abandoned the ship without ensuring his youngest prodigy had a life raft. This was not just a minor bump in the road. It was a devastating psychological and financial blow. Imagine being 16 years old, having sacrificed your normal teenage years to serve a corporate machine, only to be discarded via a midnight phone call because a billionaire decided to pivot his business portfolio to television production. The label drama left Courtney caught in an agonizing legal limbo. Because of the complex nature of major label contracts, she could not legally release her own original songs elsewhere. She could not capitalize on her lingering television fame, and she was legally bound to a ghost ship of a record label that no longer had a functioning marketing department. The silence that followed her sudden disappearance was not an artistic choice. It was a contractual stranglehold. Online trolls and critics began to swarm, spreading fake accusations that her initial nervousness on stage was just a manufactured act, and claiming she was a one-trick pony. Fans assumed she had just faded away into obscurity, a flash in the pan who could not handle the intense pressure of the music industry. The media unfairly labeled her a failure, completely ignorant of the fact that the failure belonged entirely to Simon Cowell's reckless boardroom strategies. However, this catastrophic corporate failure was actually the hidden catalyst for one of the most brilliant and aggressive independent pivots in modern music history. When the dust finally settled and the restrictive legacy contracts finally expired, Courtney Hadwin did not just quietly return to the industry asking for permission. She staged a total defection. She realized a harsh truth that takes most musicians decades to learn. Major record labels are primarily designed to protect the parent corporation, not the creator. The experience completely shattered her faith in the traditional music industry, but it forged a lethal new determination within her. She reportedly rejected multiple lucrative offers from other major labels who were trying to swoop in and buy her contract at a massive discount. Instead, she chose the absolute hardest path available to a teenage artist. She went completely independent. By 2023, she began releasing music entirely on her own terms, starting with the explosive and unapologetic single, That Girl Don't Live Here. The title itself was a brilliantly crafted, direct middle finger to the industry executives who tried to mold her into a docile pop princess. She funded her own studio recording sessions. She legally retained 100% of her master recordings. She signed with an independent management agency, Total Artist Management, and took complete, uncompromised creative control over her sonic direction. This transition requires a massive technical understanding of the modern digital music ecosystem. Independent artists today have to act as their own A&R department, their own global marketing team, and their own booking agents. Courtney leaned heavily into her dedicated, fiercely loyal social media following, utilizing platforms to completely bypass the traditional radio gatekeepers who previously ignored her. She adopted a gritty, jazz-infused, pop-punk rock soundscape that the major labels claimed would never sell to a mainstream audience. Fast forward to 2025 and 2026, and her strategic independence resulted in the triumphant release of her debut album, Little Ms. Jagged. The album was not heavily quantized or recorded in a sterile pop factory. It was tracked live at the legendary Metropolis studios, perfectly capturing the exact guttural, untamed, lightning-in-a-bottle energy that made her famous in the first place. She released visually stunning music videos for singles like Spellbound and the classic blues-inspired track You Only Love a Man When I Lie, entirely outside the major label ecosystem. By stepping outside the mainstream pipeline, she successfully resurrected her career, generating revenue directly from her core fanbase without a corporate middleman systematically siphoning off 80% of her hard-earned profits. This phenomenon of the mogul's regret is not an isolated incident. It represents a massive, recurring structural shift in the modern entertainment landscape. The music industry is currently witnessing a massive exodus of raw, authentic talent escaping legacy contracts designed in the 20th century. Look at the phenomenal, record-breaking rise of Ray, a British artist who was maliciously shelved by her major label for 7 agonizing years, constantly told she wasn't ready to release an album, until she finally forced her way out, went independent, and practically swept the Brit Awards. Or examine the massive viral trajectory of Oliver Anthony, who famously rejected multi-million-dollar major label deals right out of the gate because he knew the corporate machine would instantly dilute his authentic, working-class voice. You can even look at the ultimate industry power move, Taylor Swift systematically re-recording her entire catalog to devalue the master recordings sold out from under her. The exact same shift in power dynamics applied to Courtney's journey. Cowell relied on an outdated, draconian business model that inherently assumes the label is infinitely more important than the artist. Cowell's factory formula worked brilliantly in the early 2000s when reality television and terrestrial radio were the only distribution channels available to the public. But in a highly decentralized digital economy, locking a generational vocal talent in a boardroom for 2 years is not just bad management, it is downright financial malpractice. The millions upon millions of dollars that Syco Music foolishly left on the table by trying to tame her are now flowing directly into Courtney's independent enterprise. She definitively proved that the manufactured pop machine is practically obsolete when directly confronted with undeniable, authentic rock power. Cowell thought he was signing a quiet, controllable asset, but he accidentally signed a musical revolution that he could not contain. He arrogantly tried to cage the lion, and in doing so, he lost out on the biggest rock prodigy of our generation. The devastating midnight phone call that temporarily destroyed her teenage career ended up being the exact catalyst that saved her artistic soul. Courtney Hadwin is no longer the nervous 13-year-old girl shaking on a talent show stage, waiting for a billionaire to validate her existence. She is a fully realized, independent rock icon who owns her masters, controls her own creative destiny, and answers to absolutely no one but her fans. Her story violently exposes the fundamental rot and exploitation sitting at the core of major label reality television contracts. But she is not the only artist who had to fight a massive corporate machine for her freedom. If you want to know exactly how another massive music industry mogul manipulated the system and nearly ruined a generational talent for their own financial gain, you have to look at the dark truth behind the rise of another massive pop star. Click the video on your screen right now to uncover the insidious management tactics that the mainstream music industry desperately wants to keep hidden from the public. I will see you over there.